She crashed the wrong funeral with a wild TikTok video and triggered a billionaire's obsession. Alyssa thought she was attending her friend's funeral. Instead, she walked into the wrong service, the funeral of billionaire CEO Russell Parker's uncle, in front of his powerful, ice-cold family. She raised the rainbow flag and played a TikTok tribute. One shocking mistake, one forbidden spark, and from that moment, everything changed. The inside of the church was breathtaking. Gilded details, towering chandeliers, and heavy velvet drapes gave the space an almost sacred grandeur. At the head of the mahogany casket, the carefully arranged flowers were nearly swallowed up by a sea of pure white orchids. Russell Parker stepped up to the pulpit, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp green eyes and perfectly styled light brown hair. His tailored suit clung to his athletic frame, every movement radiating controlled power and cold precision. He paused for 5 seconds, his eyes sweeping across the congregation with his usual serious, distant gaze before finally beginning his speech. There wasn't the slightest tremor in his voice, not even a hint of emotion. "My dear Uncle Jeffrey, maybe we can't quite remember him as someone who greeted you with a warm smile, arms wide open, making you feel all cozy inside when he looked at you." A few people lowered their heads. A soft, tense murmur rippled through the crowd. But Jeffrey loved order. He loved discipline. He loved living by a plan. He absolutely hated surprises. He paused again, scanning the room with those same detached eyes. He was a perfectionist. Every single day, at the exact same time, he took the exact same walk along the exact same path. He didn't want anyone touching his stuff. His coffee, always at 63 degrees. He didn't believe in love or marriage. He was a man of logic. That's why he never started a family. His tone remained utterly composed, as if he were reading an instruction manual. In the front row, Russell's brother Tim struggled to hold back his laughter. Leaning over to his mother, he whispered, "Mum, isn't he basically describing himself right now?" His mother frowned and quickly hushed him. "Shh, Tim." Russell continued in the same flat, steady voice. "And he preferred living his life without anyone interfering. Some might call that selfish. I call it character." He dipped his head slightly, almost as if to say, "Yes, that's exactly who he was." "Rest in peace, Uncle." Alyssa practically burst through the church doors, completely out of breath. Flicking her reddish hair back from her face, she strode quickly toward the center of the church in her delicate heels. Of course, she was late. The place was packed. Heavy black suits, hundreds of serious, somber faces. As soon as people noticed her, their eyes locked onto her like she was some kind of strange outsider, disturbing the sacred quiet. And right at that moment, the priest's voice echoed across the hall. "Miss, would you like to say a few words in remembrance of the deceased?" For a split second, Alyssa's brain froze in panic, but there was no turning back now. For Jeffrey, she would do anything. She walked toward the pulpit, her steps heavy. Her eyes glistened. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might explode. As she reached the podium and made her way up, she tried to ignore the stiff, uptight man who was glaring at her from head to toe like she was some kind of intruder. She took a deep breath, fixed her hair, glanced at the congregation. So this is Jeffrey's family, she thought. All rich, all aristocratic, figures. But she was determined to give Jeffrey the farewell he deserved, no matter what. And then she began. Jeffrey. He was a free spirit. A few eyebrows lifted, whispers started buzzing through the room. Alyssa kept going. I only knew him for 3 years. But believe me, the warmth, the closeness he had, it felt like I'd known him my whole life. Some heads exchanged quick glances. Family members in the front row leaned in, now listening very, very closely. Especially Claudia Parker, sitting in the very front, dabbing her teary eyes while raising her brows in surprise. Our little sleepovers, just the two of us, became our thing. We'd talk for hours. And yes, we shared secrets, that's how close we were. Her voice trembled as she wiped away a tear. I'm going to miss him stopping by every night in his favorite pink bathrobe. In the second row, Tim leaned over to whisper to his brother Russell. Is she talking about my Uncle Jeffrey? The same Jeffrey who used to walk around the house fully dressed in a suit until bedtime and made women take medical tests before sleeping with them. Russell leaned forward, eyes wide open, staring at Alyssa. But Alyssa, she was completely lost in her emotions, pouring her heart out. Secrets. Sometimes he'd talk to me about how his family never really accepted him. That really broke him. He couldn't hold back his tears when he spoke about it. Judging him for his sexual choices was so cruel. And yes, I have to admit I felt anger toward his family for that. Tim slapped his hand over his mouth, desperately trying not to burst out laughing. Mom, I think Uncle was gay. Claudia gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Oh my God, how is that even possible? I had no idea. I didn't know anything. Her husband, Edward Parker, father of Tim and Russell, let out a dry, sarcastic chuckle and slapped his knee. Well, I'll be damned. Russell jumped in, shaking his head furiously. No, I knew my uncle. He went out with a different woman every single night. What the hell is this woman even talking about? Edward turned to Russell, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. Jesus, Russell, was he using Viagra or something? Tim couldn't resist, grinning ear to ear. Dad, looks like he was 70, but performing like he was 20. Man had tricks. The murmurs in the room were getting louder, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But Alyssa? She was in her own world, fully immersed in the moment. Her voice broke as she continued, say what you want, but he was absolutely devoted to his craft. He was amazing at what he did. If you had ever seen him on stage as Cher or Madonna, I swear you would have been proud. But personally, my favorite was always Gigi. That one really captured his soul. Her voice grew more theatrical as she leaned into the drama. And honestly, no nightclub in this entire state has ever seen a Madonna quite like him. Her voice cracked as emotion took over. My dear friend Jeffrey, he died doing what he loved. And knowing that brings me at least some comfort. With that, Alyssa let out a deep sigh and started sobbing. I mean, come on. Who wouldn't want to check out while filming a TikTok dressed as Madonna, tripping on the carpet and cracking their head on the coffee table? At that moment, the priest's blood pressure seemed to drop. He had to grip the pulpit to steady himself, though no one seemed to notice. All eyes were locked on Alyssa. The church was holding its breath. Some people had their hands over their mouths in pure shock. Others were desperately trying not to laugh out loud. Tim finally lost the battle and let out a snort of laughter. Claudia's soft sobbing could be heard in the background. Russell shot up from his seat, unable to take it any longer, his voice cool and sharp, slicing through the heavy silence. Excuse me, who exactly are you? Alyssa calmly raised her hand toward Russell, as if to signal, please just let me finish. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she navigated through her videos. Then she synced it via Bluetooth to the big screen behind the pulpit. Turning briefly to Russell, who had stepped closer, she whispered, I have to do this, sir. Because Jeffrey would have wanted it. Suddenly, Jeffrey appeared on the screen, dressed head to toe in full Madonna drag. It was a TikTok live video, wearing nothing but black lace lingerie, dancing seductively to Justify My Love. He moved with surprising grace, until his foot caught the edge of the carpet. There was a muffled puff. Then came the dull thud of his head hitting the corner of the coffee table. A faint "ah" escaped from the speakers, and the video abruptly cut off. The room exploded into a wave of gasps, muffled laughter, and sheer disbelief. Alyssa, tears streaming down her face, stepped down from the pulpit. She reached into her pocket and slowly, with great care, pulled out a rainbow flag. With gentle hands, she draped the flag across the casket. Its bright colors cut through the heavy, somber atmosphere like a bold, defiant statement. At that moment, someone in the congregation noticed the priest and rushed over to help him as he nearly collapsed behind the pulpit. But just then, Alyssa's eyes fell on the open casket. She froze. Her face drained of color, her pupils widened, her throat tightened. Oh my God, who is this? She was at the wrong funeral. Russell yanked the rainbow flag off the casket in one swift motion, cramming it angrily into his pocket while shooting Alyssa a furious glare. I'm so sorry, Alyssa said, finally realizing the massive mistake she had just made. On the giant screen behind them, the video was still frozen on the image of drag queen Jeffrey, striking a fierce Madonna pose. The barely suppressed snickers from the crowd were getting louder and louder. Russell grabbed Alyssa firmly by the arm and practically dragged her toward the exit. "I don't know who you are," he hissed through gritted teeth, "but in 5 minutes you've completely destroyed the reputation my uncle spent his entire life building." As they reached the church doors, Alyssa had managed to say, "I'm sorry," at least 50 times in a matter of 10 feet, but Russell's eyes were still burning with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. Alyssa stumbled over her words, trying to explain. I gave the driver the right address. I came at the right time. I don't even know how I ended up here. This wasn't supposed to happen." Russell clenched his jaw, fists tightening at his sides as he struggled to keep his temper under control. "Which church did you tell the driver?" he asked, his voice low, sharp and tight. Alyssa's voice was shaky. "St. Peter's." Russell slowly turned his fiery gaze back to her. "This is St. Paul's, miss. And thank you, sincerely, for giving my uncle the kind of send-off he wouldn't have wished on his worst enemy. If he saw this, I'm pretty sure he would have dropped dead all over again." Alyssa was on the verge of tears. "Look, I don't know what else to say, but maybe... maybe your uncle deserved a colorful funeral. Everyone was smiling as they said goodbye." Russell stepped in closer, his voice now a low growl. "Do you even hear yourself? My Uncle Jeffrey wasn't colorful. He spent his entire life making sure he wasn't, and how dare you pull this circus act inside a church?" Alyssa realized she had to get out, immediately. "My condolences," she mumbled, taking cautious steps backward. "I'm really, really sorry." And with that, she turned and sprinted off in her heels, disappearing down the steps as fast as she could. Just then, Tim walked out of the church, still chuckling, and slapped Russell on the shoulder. "Man, I gotta say, Uncle Jeffrey's funeral, best thing about him. Haven't had that much fun in years." Russell shot him a death glare. "Get a grip, Tim." He was a respectable man. He didn't deserve to be humiliated like this, and Mom's devastated. Tim rolled his eyes. "Oh, lighten up, Russell. Maybe try some humor in your life for once. By the way, the girl was kind of cute. Did you at least get her name, her number, anything?" Russell glared so hard he practically punched Tim with his eyes, then stormed back inside to comfort their mother. For Alyssa, the morning had started like any other. Maybe she'd had a little too much coffee. Maybe her inbox had exploded a little more than usual. She'd been working at the art gallery for 8 months now, still living under the shadow of Joycelyn, the owner, trying to prove herself. Technically, she wasn't even considered one of the lead consultants yet, but today was different. With Joycelyn out of town and no one else around, the responsibility of handling VIP clients had fallen squarely into Alyssa's hands. "This is it," Alyssa told herself when she got the news at 11 a.m. "Today's my chance to shine." Joycelyn was fabulous, connected, and absolutely insufferable. But if you wanted to build a career in the art world in this city, this gallery was the place to be. Joycelyn had called her earlier that morning. "Ali, I so wish I could be there, darling. Today's VIP clients are extremely important people. Are you sure you can handle it?" "Oh, Joycelyn, relax. I've got this," Alyssa replied confidently. "You don't have to worry. I'll deliver impeccable service, keep the clients happy, and close those sales." "We'll see," Joycelyn purred with her signature condescending tone. Alyssa reviewed the email Joycelyn had sent with the client details. 2 p.m. Mr. Leonard Kravinsky, Adult Entertainment Holdings, High-End Club and Private Suites Collection, Erotic and Nude Figurative Art. 4 p.m. Russell Parker, Global Marinas, Yacht Manufacturing, Luxury Resorts Collection, Contemporary Coastal Landscapes and Modern Nautical Abstracts. "I can handle this," Alyssa told herself. She personally prepared both private rooms according to each client's taste. She even hand-picked the refreshments. Before the appointments, she gathered her red hair into a half-up style, dabbed away the excess lipstick with a napkin, and gave herself one final look in the mirror. In her black mini dress, paired with a sleek blazer, she struck the perfect balance. Elegant, but not over the top. "All right, girl," Alyssa whispered to herself. "Time to crush these sales and prove you've got what it takes to handle VIP clients." Her heart was pounding, but she was ready. Today was her shot. Meanwhile, Russell Parker checked his watch as he stepped into the gallery. Right on time, as always. He was here to pick out a painting for his father, Edward Parker's 73rd birthday, something classy enough for his father's office at work, but still matching his dad's personal taste. And if it happened to be a solid investment piece on top of that, even better. 45 minutes, Russell thought to himself. That's all I've got to get this done. Alyssa quickly made her way to the VIP section, double-checking the notes on her card one last time. Mr. Leonard Kravinsky, Adult Entertainment Holdings, High-End Club and Private Suites. Collection, Erotic and Nude Figurative Art. She walked into the private room, spotted a man standing with his back to her, studying one of the paintings. Taking a deep breath, she put on her brightest smile, flipped the switch to maximum charm, and approached with confident steps. "Mr. Kravinsky, it's such a pleasure to have you here today." As Russell slowly turned around, his mind was already mildly skeptical about how qualified this assistant really was, especially with Joycelyn out of town. He barely registered which name she'd just called him. Then Alyssa froze in place. The moment Russell's eyes landed on her, his eyebrows shot up. Standing right in front of him was the same woman who had draped an LGBT flag over his uncle's polished mahogany casket, and there was no way in hell he was ever going to forget that face. "You!" Russell blurted out in shock. "No way!" In that instant, Alyssa's professional poise completely evaporated. Her face turned ghost white. She held her breath, trying desperately to figure out what the hell she was supposed to say next. You work here?" Russell asked, still processing, his voice sharp with disbelief. Alyssa forced a smile, silently screaming inside. "Oh my gosh, no! This cannot be happening. What are the odds? Why today? Why him?" "Welcome," she said, trying to sound perfectly composed. "I'll be assisting you today. If you'd like, we can head straight to the private selection I've prepared just for you. Please, follow me." In that moment, Alyssa made a snap decision. Pretend it never happened. Just keep it moving. Work, sell, survive. Russell followed her with stiff, frustrated steps, still half in shock. Unbelievable, he thought. The nerve of this woman, the audacity. He quickened his pace to keep up with her brisk stride as she practically power-walked toward the VIP room. The entire time, his eyes never left her. Alyssa, meanwhile, spun around with her most professional posture, but her nerves were obvious under the surface. "I've curated a very exclusive collection just for you," she began, her voice steady but her pulse racing. "I believe it aligns perfectly with the niche you requested. I'm confident it'll meet, or even exceed, your expectations." Russell didn't even glance at the art. Instead, he stepped in, closing the gap between them slightly. "And your name is Alyssa?" she replied with a polite smile. "Alyssa Lewis. I'm the gallery's VIP client consultant." "Interesting," Russell said, eyes narrowing. "Joysley never mentioned you to me. I can't help but wonder if you might have accidentally ended up here too." "I understand," Alyssa said, maintaining her professional tone without missing a beat. "You're referring to our previous encounter. Yes, it was deeply unfortunate, and believe me, I relive that moment every single day with great regret. Once again, I want to sincerely apologize for what happened." She took a breath and gestured toward the artwork. "Now, if we may proceed to the collection." Russell raised both eyebrows this time as his eyes shifted, finally, to the first piece. It was enormous. A woman posed on a red velvet backdrop, draped in sheer black lace, the painting rich in erotic, sensual detail from head to toe. Alyssa launched into her presentation, voice full of enthusiasm. "This piece is titled The Scarlet Seduction. The artist captures the bold expression of desire through the richness of the red tones and the play of light and shadow. I believe it could serve as a strong, motivational piece for your workspace." Russell swallowed, still staring at the painting. "Motivational, huh?" Alyssa nodded, fully committed. "Absolutely. Especially when you consider the kind of private workspaces involved in your particular line of business." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was sharing some highly professional insight, and tried to smile politely. "Ambiance is everything when it comes to private suites, wouldn't you agree? You want your guests' levels of desire to elevate, to enhance the stimulation factors, so to speak." Alyssa was choosing her words carefully, navigating this with surgical precision. "Okay, yes," she thought. "I went to the wrong funeral. Yes, I made a mistake. But come on, for a guy who works in adult entertainment, he's awfully uptight about the possibility of having a gay uncle." Meanwhile, Russell's eyes were narrowing. He glanced from the painting, back to Alyssa, then back to the painting. He took a deep breath. But before he could say anything, Alyssa, eager to steer the meeting forward, quickly moved to the second piece. On the second wall, framed in thick gold leaf, hung a dramatic scene. A naked couple locked in an erotic embrace, shadows highlighting every curve and movement of their tangled bodies. Alyssa spun around, eyes practically sparkling. And here, Venus uncovered, a nude woman with a man kneeling before her, bringing her pleasure. She paused briefly to let the words settle. A bold and powerful piece, wouldn't you say? It's that perfect blend of feminine energy and masculine dominance. She gestured toward the artwork like a magician unveiling her grand trick. "I believe this could create an inspiring atmosphere for your private suites or client meetings." But as she glanced at Russell's face, her voice started to crack. "I mean, that's what I think." Russell furrowed his brows, muttering under his breath. "For my father." Masculine and feminine balance. Alyssa didn't lose momentum. "Oh, this next one is called Ecstasy in Motion. It's a modern depiction of an intimate couple, mid-connection." She pressed on, her sales instincts refusing to surrender. "I think, if you're considering something for your father, it really captures his energy, adds a certain vitality to his office space. Her voice faded into almost a whisper. Who wouldn't be inspired by that? Russell just stared at her wide-eyed, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Well, he said dryly, it's clearly inspiring you. Alyssa blinked. I'm sorry. What? Russell shoved his hands into his pockets, stepping in closer. He couldn't hold back any longer. Alyssa, right? My father is 73 years old. He's on heart medication. Exactly what kind of workspace did you have in mind for him? Alyssa's cheeks flushed, but she managed not to panic, flipping through her notes like her life depended on it. Well, I assumed based on your industry, you wouldn't be interested in landscapes or nautical paintings. I'm exactly interested in landscapes and nautical paintings, Russell replied, now with a smirk creeping onto his face. Alyssa's hands fumbled as she tried to figure out what to do with her arms. For the second time in her life, she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole, and for the second time, it was happening right in front of the same man. Russell tilted his head, cutting her off with a dry, amused grin. I'm Russell Parker, CEO of Sterling Group. We build yachts, marinas, and luxury resorts. Alyssa's pupils dilated as realization hit her like a truck. She slammed the folder shut in full panic mode. Oh my God, I opened the wrong client file. Leonard Kravinsky. Russell shook his head, letting the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. And so, for our second encounter, once again, a flawless disaster. Russell practically roared, his voice filling the room. You've just wasted 30 minutes of my valuable time, Ms. Lewis. He shook his head, his tone cutting like a blade. I have to say, it takes a special kind of talent to make this many mistakes back to back, but unfortunately that particular talent is destroying whatever shred of professionalism you may have had. He exhaled sharply, frustration radiating off him. And now I no longer have time to select a painting for my 73-year-old father's office. Though I must say, you clearly have quite the eye for nudity and eroticism. Let's hope you're just as skilled at picking out sailing landscapes. His glare narrowed into laser focus. Wrap up the most expensive one you've got and send it to the address I'll leave. And this time, no mistakes. Russell spun on his heel and stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath, God, this woman's going to give me high blood pressure. Alyssa stood frozen, her face flushed bright red, sweat beading on her forehead. Her voice barely escaped as a defeated sigh. Oh, God, please, let me never run into this man again for as long as I live. The evening sun poured through the tall windows of the Parker family's massive Connecticut estate. Around the long, solid oak dining table the family had gathered. 4 people sat at the table: Edward Parker, Claudia Parker, and 2 sons, Russell and Tim. The table was immaculately set. As always, Edward Parker's birthday dinner was more than just a meal. It was a carefully orchestrated event. Edward took life seriously, but he had no patience for unnecessary seriousness. He liked being in control, but he also knew how to keep things light while doing so. Claudia nodded politely at the server as he poured the wine. Edward, you're 73 today, and still busy managing your sons. Edward smiled slightly, casting a glance at Tim. Some sons require a bit more management than others, Claudia. Tim grinned, firing back with a wink. I believe in living a well-balanced life, Dad. Edward sliced into his fillet with surgical precision, his voice dry as ever. We call your version of balance chaos, Tim. Russell, meanwhile, was eating quietly, as always, observing the classic Parker tradition of tension-filled dinners. Edward raised his whiskey glass thoughtfully. Balance. Nice word. Unfortunately, most people confuse balance with a complete lack of discipline. Claudia quickly jumped in, trying to soften the mood. Edward, Tim is just enjoying his youth. He's already 29. Edward let out a dry chuckle, swirling the wine in his glass as his eyes narrowed. Oh, would you listen to her? Acting like the boy's practically elderly. Please, I could still fit him in my pocket. He glanced at Tim with a faint smirk, that classic Parker sarcasm lacing his voice, the kind that always hovered somewhere between affection and judgment. Tim seized the opening. Thank you, Mom. Not everyone's cut out to be a workaholic like Russell. Without even looking up, Russell replied flatly, some of us are busy keeping the family name standing. Tim smirked. And I'm busy representing the Parker name in social circles. You know, networking. Edward took a long, patient breath. He let them spar, but he was steering the conversation toward where he really wanted it to go. When dinner was over, the gifts were brought to the table. Russell personally handed over his present. Edward unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a massive, elegantly framed painting of a sailboat. The canvas, in soft blues and whites, practically carried the sea breeze right into the room. Edward admired it with genuine delight. Now this is art, strength, balance, but most importantly, control, like a sailboat commanding the wind, very fitting for the Parker family. Russell nodded, pleased. I thought it would be perfect for your office. Tim couldn't resist jumping in with his usual grin. Excellent choice, Russell. The sailboat's beautiful and all, but, you know, if there were maybe one or two sunbathing nude models on deck, that would have been a true Parker office vibe. Edward chuckled lightly. Ah, Tim, one day you'll learn. Some things belong behind closed doors, not in the office. A small, tense smile appeared on Russell's face. Then Edward turned slightly toward him with a playful glint in his eye. But truthfully, Russell, if you ever really wanted to surprise me one day, maybe you'll need to develop just a little more artistic courage. Claudia rolled her eyes with a gentle sigh. Oh, Edward. Tim leaned back comfortably in his chair, swirling his glass with that signature relaxed smirk of his. By the way, there's a little garden party tomorrow at Noel's studio. Some friends, a few clients, small crowd, should be fun. You should come, Russell. Step out, live a little. Claudia raised an eyebrow, curious. And who's Noel? Tim grinned. My Pilates instructor. Well, not just my Pilates instructor anymore, to be honest. Claudia rolled her eyes. Tim, it's always the same story with you. Russell cut in with a dry smile. So, another one of your social investments? Tim smirked wider, more like a personal investment this time. Noel's doing wonders for my body. Claudia playfully slapped him on the shoulder. At least, try to be decent while we're at the table, Tim. Mom, Noel's helping me with body control, relaxation, and honestly, I really like her. Russell shook his head disapprovingly. Edward's brows lifted ever so slightly, his tone low but sharp. Just how serious are you about Noel? Tim nodded confidently. Very. And this time I'm sure. I might even introduce him to you all soon. Actually, Russell, you should come too. It's important for Noel to meet the family. Russell immediately stiffened. I don't have time for those kinds of events. Tim grinned with exaggerated mockery. Oh, come on, Russell. You've got to feel life once in a while. You don't live entirely at a conference table, do you? Edward raised his hand, cutting through the back and forth with final authority. No, Russell, you're going. He set his whiskey glass down firmly and locked eyes with him, his voice now carrying that classic Parker weight. I want you there to keep an eye on things. I don't entirely trust Tim's taste in people. The room fell briefly quiet as Edward continued, his gaze sharp. Our family name still carries my signature. That name rests on all of us. Tim may enjoy himself, but even when Parker men enjoy themselves, we manage. We stay in control. The July sunset bathed Noel's Pilates studio garden in soft shades of orange and pink. A light summer breeze gently swayed the strings of bamboo lanterns hanging above. Tiny LED lights twinkled gracefully between the bushes and lemon trees. White floor cushions were spread across the grass, paired with low wooden tables and minimalist glass vases filled with jasmine blooms. The whole scene radiated that effortless, small group of people who figured life out energy. Mini chia seed desserts sat in delicate bowls, accompanied by matcha and jasmine teas on the tables. Soft, lo-fi jazz played in the background, adding to the chill, curated vibe. Tim pulled into the small parking lot in front of the garden. As soon as Russell stepped out of the car, Tim burst into laughter. Russell, seriously? A full suit? Russell calmly straightened his jacket. I came straight from a meeting. Tim grinned, shaking his head. I swear you're the only person here wearing a tie. Don't be shocked if someone offers you vegan cookies and a detox tea in the next 5 minutes. Russell rolled his eyes. 15 minutes, then I'm out. As they stepped into the garden, guests were casually chatting, dressed in shorts, light linens, and colorful summer dresses. A group of yoga instructors were laughing while showing off poses on the floor cushions. In a quiet corner, 2 artists were painting on easels. Russell felt like he had accidentally walked onto the set of the wrong movie. Real sports are tennis, maybe basketball or squash, he thought. Pilates? What even is that? Tim scanned the garden and quickly spotted Noel. Noel stood out effortlessly, draped in a flowing white linen outfit, golden hair cascading off their shoulders, radiating glow. With a bright smile, Noel walked over to greet them. Tim! Baby! Tim lit up as they embraced. And I brought my brother. Russell Parker, meet Noel. Noel extended a graceful hand with a polite smile. So nice to finally meet you. Russell shook hands, maintaining his usual cool distance. Pleasure. Noel grabbed a couple of iced matchas from a nearby table and handed them straight into their hands. Here, try these. Alyssa made the chia and flaxseed bites. You have to try them. Alyssa? Russell turned to Tim, raising an eyebrow. It was the second time he'd heard that name this week. Alyssa's Noel's sister, Tim explained. Actually, I'm meeting her for the first time today, too. As Noel and Tim started excitedly explaining how Tim's abs and arms had transformed over the last 6 months thanks to Pilates, Russell struggled to force down a sip of the suspiciously green, icy thing in his hand. Meanwhile, across the garden, Alyssa, wearing an olive-green spaghetti-strap dress, her red hair loose and slightly wild, was trying to escape a fitness trainer who clearly didn't understand personal space. She was, however, genuinely looking forward to meeting Noel's new boyfriend. Historically, Noel's taste in men had been catastrophic. And as the older sister, Alyssa had unofficially appointed herself as Noel's human disaster filter. Noel spotted her from across the garden, beaming. Ah, Alyssa! She's here! The second Alyssa spun around, Russell, also turning toward the voice, stepped right into her path. They collided, and half of Russell's iced matcha promptly launched itself down his crisp suit jacket and onto his freshly pressed shirt. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Alyssa gasped, eyes darting between his face and the spreading green stain. Panicking, she grabbed a napkin off the table and started dabbing at his chest, only to find herself uncomfortably close to Russell's face. Their eyes locked. Both of them blurted out in sync, "No way!" Realizing how absurdly intimate it had suddenly become, Alyssa yanked the napkin away from his chest like it was on fire. Tim couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. Noel, wide-eyed, covered their mouth. Oh, crap! Russell closed his eyes and shook his head, completely exasperated. Of course it's her. Again. Tim reached out with a big grin. Hi, Alyssa. I've heard so much about you. Wait a second. Your face looks really familiar. Oh, you're that girl, the one who turned my Uncle Jeffrey's funeral into a stand-up comedy special. I remember you now." Noel's eyes widened as they looked between Tim and Alyssa. "Wait, what? Alyssa, is this about that wrong funeral you went to? Seriously?" Noel and Tim both burst out laughing. Alyssa forced a polite smile, trying to stay composed. "Oh, Tim, really? I am so sorry. And I've already apologized to this gentleman here several times. But I don't think he's quite forgiven me yet." Russell's voice cut in, cold and sharp. "In the past 2 weeks, you've crossed my path 3 times. You've publicly humiliated my family at a funeral, tried to sell my 73-year-old father erotic artwork, and now you've dumped this green thing all over my Zegna suit. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever be free of you." Noel and Tim exchanged a quick glance, both raising their eyebrows. Tim leaned in and whispered into Noel's ear, "I say we give them some space. Let them work through their issues." Without another word, they both quietly slipped away. "I didn't spill anything on you," Alyssa snapped. "You bumped into me and you spilled your own drink. So technically you can't blame me for incident number 3. Russell narrowed his eyes. "2 incidents are more than enough, young lady, and if you hadn't turned into me, nothing would have spilled in the first place." Alyssa locked eyes with him, fed up. "You are completely insufferable, you know that? I've apologized to you 1,000 times, twice, and you haven't shown 1 ounce of basic human decency." "Oh, really?" Russell tilted his head slightly. "Maybe if you behaved with a little more grace, you know, like a proper woman, cautious, composed, poised, I might have been more inclined to be polite." Alyssa's jaw dropped. "Did you seriously just lecture me on how to be a woman?" The nerve! From a distance, Tim and Noel were watching the scene unfold, looking thoroughly entertained. "Wow," Tim whispered. "I've never seen Russell this fired up before. He's actually alive. There's serious chemistry happening. I can feel it." At that exact moment, the over-eager fitness trainer Mark inserted himself into the middle of the standoff by grabbing Alyssa's arm. "Alyssa, is he bothering you?" Both Alyssa and Russell whipped around toward Mark and shouted in perfect unison, "Stay out of it!" Mark raised his hands in surrender. All right, I'm out." Russell yanked off his jacket and started awkwardly dabbing at the massive green stain across his shirt. Alyssa couldn't help but jab again. "You really came to a garden party in a full suit and tie." "If you don't mind," Russell muttered, still trying to blot out the matcha disaster, "I'd prefer not to engage with you any further." Right then, Tim and Noel walked back over. "Russell, I'm really so sorry," Noel said, trying to smooth things over. "There's a closet inside with some of Tim's t-shirts and pants. You're welcome to change if you'd like." Russell exhaled, still annoyed. That might be a good idea. "Perfect," Noel smiled brightly. "Alyssa, why don't you show him where it is? Tim and I need to greet the guests at the door." "Fine," Alyssa said, her tone flat. "If you don't want to walk around like the Hulk all night, follow me. I'll show you the clothes." "How generous," Russell replied with a fake smile. "Are you coming or not?" Alyssa snapped, rolling her eyes. She was already walking, mumbling under her breath. "I'll show you what a woman really is, Mr. Parker." Russell exhaled, shaking his head as he followed her. At the closet, Alyssa started rummaging through the shelves while Russell stood behind her, growing more impatient by the second. "Please, just hand me anything. I don't care what it is. I just need to change." Alyssa scanned the t-shirts quickly, and then her eyes landed on that one. She froze for a second. A little devilish sparkle lit up in her eyes. "Oh, this one is perfect for Mr. Ego." She grabbed the shirt, folded it, and handed it over along with a pair of pants. "Here you go. Clean t-shirt and pants." "Perfect, thanks. Not exactly my style, but thanks to you, I guess I'll be wearing them anyway." While Russell changed, Alyssa turned around, doing her best to suppress her laughter, covering her mouth with her hand. Without even checking himself in the mirror, Russell opened the door. "You didn't need to wait. I could have found my way back." "I just wanted to be the first one to see you in that outfit," Alyssa said with a sly grin. Russell stared at her, surprised. "Has anyone ever told you you're a complete pain in the ass?" Without replying, Alyssa turned and walked ahead, her steps quick, but inside she was secretly cracking up. As they stepped back into the garden, weaving through the crowd under the soft glow of the string lights, a few people glanced at Russell, some even giving him an encouraging thumbs up. Two girls sitting on floor cushions giggled as he passed by. Up ahead, Tim and Noel were comfortably lounging on puffs, deep in conversation. When Tim spotted Alyssa walking briskly toward them, with Russell trailing behind in his new outfit, he couldn't contain his laughter. Alyssa quickly dropped herself onto the cushion next to Noel, turning her face away from Russell to hide the grin threatening to escape. Russell stared at the small group of giggling people across from him, confused, raising his hands. "What? What's so funny?" "Are you serious?" Tim said, still laughing as he stood up and grabbed Russell by the front of his shirt, reading it out loud. "I do it deeper. Pilates edition." Russell froze, his expression turning to stone. "Russell," Tim kept laughing. "Cargo pants. My favorite shirt. You know what? This whole vibe kinda works for you." Noel couldn't resist teasing Alyssa. "Alyssa, you're evil. You seriously made him wear this." Russell now had his hands on his hips, glaring at Alyssa, who was still avoiding eye contact, biting back her smile. He took a breath, keeping his cool as he slowly sat down on the cushion next to her. His voice was calm, but sharp. "How old are you?" 15. Alyssa finally turned, locking eyes with him, her face suddenly serious. "And you?" 90. "Russell, sometimes in life, mistakes happen. Things go wrong. Why are you always so uptight and serious? We all need to laugh sometimes, to let life be messy. You ever try that?" "But you take everything so seriously," Alyssa said, her voice tightening. "It's exhausting just trying to breathe around someone like you." "Maybe I take things seriously," Russell replied, his tone still firm. "Because I've had to learn that some things need to be taken seriously. I have responsibilities. People are constantly watching, waiting for me to slip. If I make a mistake, a whole lot more than just me comes crashing down. Someone like you could never understand that." "Someone like me?" Alyssa's brows furrowed. "You don't even know me. Every single time we've crossed paths, all you've done is lecture me. You're so terrified of making mistakes that you lash out at anyone who reminds you mistakes even exist." "I am responsible too," she said firmly. "I've spent my whole life cleaning up after people, their bad choices, their messes, their responsibilities that somehow landed on me. And yes, I've made plenty of mistakes too, because I'm human." She paused, her voice softening but steady. "But here's the thing I've figured out. When you spend your whole life trying to fix everything, you forget to actually live. Life is what happens while you're busy making plans. A little tolerance wouldn't kill you." Alyssa allowed herself a tiny, mischievous grin. "And for the record, in that outfit, you actually look kinda cute. I mean, visually. That's it." Without waiting for a response, she stood up and walked off toward a small group of girls laughing nearby. A few feet away, Noel and Tim were deep in their own conversation. Russell leaned his head back, staring up at the dark navy sky, speckled with stars. "Why am I still here?" he thought. "I was only supposed to stay 15 minutes. His eyes drifted over to Alyssa, watching as she flipped her red hair over one shoulder, laughing and chatting with someone in the group, and then came that odd, uncomfortable twist in his stomach. What the hell is this feeling? On the drive home, Tim kept glancing at Russell's outfit and chuckling. Russell shot him a look, eyebrows furrowed. "Are you serious about Noel, Tim?" "This time feels different," Tim said, his tone softer now. "There's something about Noel." She balanced me out. Sweet, a little crazy, really good at what she does. I'm going to introduce her to Mom and Dad next weekend. Russell shifted in his seat, uneasy. Tim, that's getting serious. You know how Dad is. He's been giving us lectures for years about who's appropriate for this family. Who is she? Is she even a fit? Tim looked over at him, voice steady. She's a perfect fit for me. Look, one golden child per family is enough. You can bring home the girl they approve of. Me? I love Noel. Russell chuckled. At this rate, there might not be anyone for me to bring home, Tim. I don't exactly see myself walking down that path. Tim grinned mischievously. You and Alyssa seem to hit it off pretty well, though. She's cute. Can you just imagine Mom's face if you walked into the house with her on your arm? Tim adopted a fake, high-pitched Claudia impression. Oh my God, Russell. This is the girl who ruined your uncle's funeral. You brought her here. Russell let out a dry laugh, shrugging. But as he stared out the window, his mind wasn't exactly on the conversation anymore. Those red waves of hair flashed through his thoughts, her hazel eyes locking with his, the way she flipped her hair, and that soft mix of jasmine and musk drifting toward him. Logic and something else entirely were now locked in a full-on battle inside his head. The morning sun stretched softly across the wide fields of the ranch. Between the white fences, horses wandered lazily, while the nearby lavender fields completed the picture-perfect pastoral scene. The sky was painted a dreamy, crystal blue, and a gentle breeze carried that distinct lavender scent through the air. As Russell slowly drove his grey sports car through the white-fenced entrance, the scent hit him. He always felt a subtle unease with unplanned meetups. When Tim had mentioned late last night that he and Noel would be grabbing brunch today, Russell had seen it as a good opportunity to get to know his brother's very serious, maybe fiancé, a little better. But last-minute plans, they threw Russell off. Of course, he hadn't asked him if anyone else was coming. He would never ask that kind of thing. But he couldn't exactly lie to himself either. Somewhere deep inside, he hoped Alyssa might be there. As much as she completely unraveled his nerves and tied his stomach in knots, Russell found himself hoping he'd see her again today. After parking, he made his way down the gravel path toward the country-style brunch spot set up at the ranch. That's when he saw Noel approaching with her usual warmth and bright, glowing smile, her long blonde hair swaying in the breeze. Just behind her was Tim. "Russell!" Noel beamed. "I'm so glad you came. We didn't really get to talk much the other night." She let out a light giggle. Tim slapped Russell on the shoulder. "Good to see you, man. You deserve a peaceful day like this, away from everything. Besides, it's my lifelong mission to teach you how to enjoy life, big brother." Russell gave a faint smile. "Little brother, someone's got to work, remember?" As they exchanged greetings, Russell subtly scanned the area. But there was no sign of Alyssa. So, she hadn't come. Of course she didn't, he thought. Can't blame her. I probably scared her off with my charming personality. Naturally, he said nothing. He wouldn't ask. They chatted lightly about how beautiful the ranch was as they strolled toward the brunch area. Just then, he noticed Noel waving ahead toward the horses, motioning excitedly. He turned his head instinctively, following her gaze. Alyssa. There she was, walking past the stables, weaving through the lavender like she belonged to the landscape itself. Her light white t-shirt and linen shorts caught the soft morning sun, making her sun-kissed skin glow effortlessly. Her red hair was loose, surrendered to the breeze, tumbling like wild silk around her shoulders. She casually twirled her hat between her fingers as she walked, her steps light, her shoulders relaxed. And yet, somehow, it felt like the entire scene was subtly orbiting around her. Russell's breath caught for a brief half-second. His eyes wandered over her, betraying his control, just for a moment, as they traced the ease in her stride, the quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. And that smile, the one that for reasons he couldn't yet explain, was starting to mess with his perfectly controlled world. He quickly pulled himself back together, trying to maintain his composure. As Alyssa approached the group for some reason, Russell instinctively turned his head the other way. With her usual warm energy, Alyssa greeted Noel and Tim, wrapping them both in a quick, friendly hug. When she turned toward Russell, she tilted her head slightly and smiled. "Hi again," she said, her voice soft, genuinely kind this time. "No funny t-shirts today." It wasn't teasing this time. It was warm, friendly, even inviting. Russell offered only a brief nod in return. A simple, tight acknowledgement. He was a master at not revealing what was boiling inside him. But the second he shut it down, he felt that pang of regret, like he had just poured a bucket of ice water onto a flame that desperately wanted to burn. Of course, none of that showed on his face. They made small talk as they approached the long brunch table by the edge of the garden. On the table, tall glass pitchers of lemon water, fresh squeezed orange juice, croissants, avocado toasts, colorful fruit platters, the air filled with the soft blend of lavender, mint, and coffee. Tim quickly found a comfortable spot at the table, while Russell, very much pretending not to notice Alyssa, felt her presence settle into the very fabric of the space. And somehow into his chest. As the conversation moved along, naturally it circled back to Noel and Tim's relationship. Russell, ever the steady interrogator, gently steered the discussion. "Noel, we haven't really talked much about your family. Where are they? What do they do?" Noel smiled softly. Alyssa gave her a quick glance, almost like a silent, "Please, don't get too deep" signal. But Noel continued, her voice calm and honest. "There's not much of a grand story, Russell. We grew up in Norwalk, just the four of us. Mom was a teacher, Dad was a carpenter. He was very talented in his craft, but not so much with money or business. Things got rough over the years. And then, one day I guess it got too hard for him. He left, walked away from the debt, the responsibilities, from us. We never expected it, but in time, I forgave him." Noel's soft smile never wavered. Russell's brows furrowed. A father who just leaves? He couldn't help but compare it to his own father, Edward Parker, whose sense of duty, unity, and control ruled over the Parker household. "You say it so calmly," Russell said, surprised. "It's a painful story." Noel still smiled. "Yes, Russell, we went through some very hard times, especially after we lost Mom 2 years later. It was just Alyssa and me after that. Dad never called, never checked in. But instead of holding on to anger and letting it eat away at me, I've tried to understand him. He was a weak man, not capable of carrying the weight he was given. If I let that bitterness control me, it would only steal my own life energy. Everyone has a story, don't they? I think he never learned responsibility or unity from his own family. Hopefully, wherever he is now, he's finding some kind of awareness in carrying that weight." As Noel spoke, Alyssa subtly turned her head away, as if to shield Russell from seeing the sadness in her eyes. Noel continued gently, almost with awe. "Back then, Alyssa was in college. She studied art history, worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, right, Alyssa?" She glanced at her sister. "God, how did you even do it?" she said softly, full of admiration. Russell now found himself staring directly at Alyssa, his gaze locked. The carefree, reckless, light-hearted woman he thought he knew was unraveling into something much more complex. Without realizing it, he was studying every tiny move she made, drawn in, wanting to understand her. For the first time, wanting to really see her. "She used to work overnight shifts at the bookstore," Noel continued. "Then she'd head to class during the day, spend weekends taking art lessons, and somehow still manage to squeeze in 2, sometimes 3, jobs. And while doing all that, she took care of me. She kept me afloat, she parented me, she made sure we survived, and she still finished school." Noel smiled warmly. raising her glass toward Alyssa. "My amazing big sister, I'm so proud of her." Alyssa blushed, covering her cheeks with both hands. "Okay, okay," she laughed nervously. "The sun's pretty strong today, isn't it? Is it just me, or is it getting a little hot out here?" Russell turned his gaze from Alyssa to Noel. "That's quite a story," he said, his voice carrying, for the first time, a faint trace of warmth. "Very different from ours, right, Tim?" Tim shot his brother a sharp look, as if warning him not to push further, but Russell gestured for Noel to continue. "So, how did you both end up here?" Noel lifted her lemonade and smiled at Alyssa. "Thanks to my sister, of course. She's also a very talented painter. Back in Norwalk, she used to sell her art to decorate small hotels. While working at the Children's Museum, she also ran a little art blog and social media account. About 4 years ago, we moved here. Alyssa saved enough to set up a new life for us, helped me build my training business, and gave us a fresh start." She gave Tim a playful shoulder bump and grinned. "So, whoever wants me, they'll have to ask Alyssa, my sister, my parent, my everything." Alyssa, no longer smiling, gently tried to change the subject. "All right, maybe we've covered enough personal history for one brunch." But Russell looked straight at her. "I'm actually very interested. If these two are planning to get married, we should all get to know each other. Our family takes marriage seriously." Tim cut in sharply, his tone tense. "Russell, please." Russell leaned back, unbothered. "Tim, I can see why you've fallen for Noel. She's sweet, she's full of energy, and clearly you both care deeply for each other." He glanced at Noel, who smiled politely. Alyssa, however, narrowed her eyes at Russell. She could feel what was coming next. "But we Parkers, we see marriage as a partnership," Russell continued, his voice calm but firm. "I have no personal objection to your future plans. Tim's 28. He can make his own decisions. But he's still a Parker, and Parker isn't just a family, it's a business." Alyssa rolled her eyes and turned her head. "Oh, God. Here we go." Tim stepped in. "This really isn't the time or place, Russell." Russell raised his hand to stop him. "It's exactly the time, Tim. Noel deserves to understand what she's stepping into." His tone hardened slightly as he turned toward Noel. "You need to realize you won't just be moving into a cute little house doing Pilates all day. Whether you like it or not, Tim's a partner in this company. He has responsibilities. Our father views marriage like a contract. It's always about the terms being fair, balanced, compatible." Noel lowered her head, clearly hurt this time. "Russell!" Tim snapped, his voice sharp. "These are facts, Tim," Russell said coldly. "How long do you think you can keep avoiding reality?" Alyssa shot Russell a burning glare. "Bravo," she said sharply. "You've somehow managed to turn yet another perfectly lovely morning into the Ice Age. That's a real skill. Freezing the entire atmosphere the moment you enter a room." Without waiting for a reply, Alyssa stood up and briskly walked toward the horses. Russell squinted, watching her storm off. "She's completely disarming," he thought. "Dangerous. That woman is a red-headed danger." "All right," Tim finally sighed, trying to cool the tension. "That's just Russell for you. Mr. Perfectly Right. Everything's got to be neat, tidy, and fully approved by the imaginary rulebook he carries around in his head. But hey, he's still my big brother. And in his own way, he's always had my back." Tim smiled, trying to move things along. "Now, how about we change the subject? Let's clear our heads. Let's go take a ride around the ranch." Off in the distance, they saw Alyssa already riding, seated gracefully on a nearly coal-black horse, her hair flying in the breeze as she trotted up the path. Russell couldn't take his eyes off her silhouette, her red hair fluttering like a flame in the wind. The words he wanted to say got lost somewhere inside him, swallowed by something else he couldn't quite name. He followed Tim and Noel toward the stables, but his eyes never left Alyssa as she disappeared farther up the trail. Soon, Russell mounted his own horse and trailed slightly ahead of Tim and Noel, keeping his gaze locked on Alyssa in the distance. As he rode, Russell suddenly realized, for someone who always dismissed this kind of thing as idle nonsense, spending time in nature, doing anything unrelated to work, being still with his own thoughts, he hadn't allowed himself this kind of space in years. Pointless, he would have called it. And yet here he was. And strangely, he felt good. He didn't want to lose sight of her. She's reckless, Russell thought, his eyes narrowing. She makes huge mistakes, owns them without flinching, and somehow that wild honesty, that raw confidence that irritates me, it's also a kind of strength. He whispered almost without realizing it. Fascinating. But then something shifted. Alyssa's horse suddenly picked up speed, charging farther up the trail. Within seconds, she disappeared around a bend, slipping completely out of Russell's sight. Russell's instincts immediately kicked in. When he glanced back, he noticed Tim and Noel had fallen quite a bit behind. The sharp alarm bell inside Russell, that finely tuned internal system he lived by, rang loud and clear. Without hesitation, he nudged his horse with his heels, loosening the reins slightly. "Come on, buddy," he muttered under his breath. "Let's go." "Come on, buddy," he muttered under his breath. "Let's go." Dust clouds trailed behind him like thin streaks as his horse galloped full speed. Russell gripped the reins with expert control, his body fully synced with the animal's rhythm, balanced but aggressive, controlled yet charging hard after her. Despite pushing his horse to the limit, he still hadn't caught up. They had long since left the main ranch behind, now veering onto a narrow path. Of course, Russell thought, teeth clenched. Once again, chaos with Alyssa Lewis. Then, as he rounded a small rise, he spotted her, just ahead, and immediately sensed something was wrong. That's when it happened. Alyssa's horse suddenly reared up, front legs slicing into the air. With a wild jolt, it threw her from its back. Alyssa let out a sharp gasp as her body hit the ground with a heavy thud. Russell reacted instantly. He steered his horse sharply to her side, practically leaping off the saddle before the animal had fully stopped. He dropped to his knees beside her. Alyssa lay flat on her back, her fiery red hair spread wildly across her face, catching glints of sunlight. "Alyssa!" Russell called out, his voice tight with panic. He gently brushed her hair from her face, then placed his hand on her neck, checking her pulse, then her chest. In the next second, instinct kicked in. He tilted her chin, leaning down to start mouth to mouth. But just as he was about to make contact, Alyssa's voice snapped up. "What the hell are you doing, Parker?" Startled, Russell jerked back, both relieved and slightly embarrassed. "I thought you were unconscious." "No," she groaned, "just trying to catch my breath." But as she slowly sat up, her face twisted in pain. "You shouldn't move," Russell said firmly. "We need to call an ambulance." Alyssa rolled her eyes. "Do I really look like I need to be rushed to the ER?" Russell's jaw tensed. "You always think everything's nothing, don't you?" She shot him a look, a mix of pain and pure annoyance. "I'll live. Thanks for your concern. It's just, my ankle's killing me." "You've got some cuts on your face," Russell said, gently brushing Alyssa's hair back to get a better look. Then, carefully, he took her injured wrist in both hands, cradling it softly between his palms, his thumbs lightly pressing along the joint and soft tissue, focused, controlled, but tender. "Here?" he asked, like a doctor doing a careful exam. Alyssa nodded, biting her lip slightly. Their bodies were now closer than necessary, closer than either of them probably intended. The air between them felt charged. "It's already starting to swell," he said seriously. Alyssa tilted her head, locking her eyes on his, and gave him that signature mischievous little smile. "You know, it's honestly kind of annoying how you seem to know everything," she teased. Russell tried to keep his composure, but his lips tugged into a subtle grin. "Well, I think a simple thank you for saving me would probably be more appropriate right now." Alyssa raised an eyebrow, playing along. "Wait, were you following me, Parker?" He smirked slightly. "Let's just say, when it comes to you, it's statistically safer for everyone if I keep you in my line of sight." Then, with no warning, he slipped one arm behind her back and the other under her legs, effortlessly lifting her off the ground. "Whoa!" Alyssa gasped, caught off guard. "What are you doing?" "You're not walking anywhere on that ankle," Russell said matter-of-factly, "and since your horse apparently ran off, which I should add, even your horse couldn't handle, I guess we're improvising." Alyssa let out a small laugh. "Wow, really uplifting pep talk for an injured woman." She awkwardly shifted in his arms, clearly unsure where to place her head as he carried her. But as Russell tried to lift her up onto his horse, the animal suddenly balked, stepped back, then spun and bolted into a full gallop, disappearing down the trail. Russell's horse followed suit, leaving them both standing there, stranded. He stood frozen for a second, still holding Alyssa in his arms, staring after the disappearing horses. Alyssa burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Parker, your master plan just fell apart, so what now, genius?" Russell shot her a look, his voice dry but firm. "If I hadn't followed you, you do realize you'd be lying flat on this rocky ground all by yourself right now, don't you? So maybe don't push your luck too far." Alyssa grinned, eyes sparkling. "Fair point. But let's not pretend you didn't secretly enjoy playing the hero." Russell, still staring at the empty trail, squinted under the harsh midday sun. For the first time in a very long time, he had absolutely no plan. He exhaled and mumbled half to himself, half to her. "Okay, we can handle this. First, let's find some shade." They moved carefully through the thick trees, a few minutes into the woods. As Russell carried Alyssa in his arms, his steps fell into a rhythm that oddly synced with the beating of his heart. His broad shoulders shifted slightly with every step, muscles taut, and with each breath, Alyssa could feel the subtle tension in his hold. Alyssa, meanwhile, couldn't quite figure out where to rest her head, sometimes leaning against his shoulder, sometimes lifting her chin slightly to glance around. Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, she whispered with dry sarcasm, "Parker, I know you can barely tolerate me, and believe me, being helpless in your arms right now isn't exactly my dream scenario either." "My name's Russell," he replied, eyes focused on the uneven ground ahead, carefully measuring each step. "Why do you always call me Parker?" Alyssa let out a soft chuckle. "Because you're a Parker, and I'm, well, just a simple Alyssa. The fact that you're even carrying me right now must feel like some huge act of sacrifice." "God, a Parker carrying a nobody. What a scandal," she added with a playful laugh. "You're completely missing my point," Russell said, his tone still serious. "Logic is built on balance. When the equation becomes unstable, the system breaks. That doesn't make Tim or Noel any less valuable. It just means that imbalance leads to failure. It's basic science. Haven't you figured that out yet?" Alyssa narrowed her eyes, her tone shifting. "So, you're basically insulting me while carrying me. That's impressive, even for you." Russell sighed. "I don't think we understand each other at all. We speak different languages. Our operating systems aren't compatible. Let's not make it personal." "Oh, it feels pretty personal to me right now," Alyssa snapped, "considering the fact that I'm literally in your arms." Russell allowed himself the faintest of smirks. "Fair point, and for the record, I wouldn't exactly call you featherlight, so maybe don't distract me too much. I'm trying not to drop both of us on our faces." Alyssa gasped dramatically. "Wow, such a charmer, Parker." He couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh this time. "Just trying to keep us upright, Miss Lewis." "Where exactly are we going?" Alyssa asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've identified a spot just ahead," Russell said, his voice calm as he carefully navigated the uneven ground. "There's a tall tree by the water with enough shade. We'll stop there." Alyssa let out a playful giggle. "Unbelievable. You identified it? Let me guess. You scanned the entire terrain with your internal operating system, ran the risk assessment, calculated the survival odds." Very RoboCop of you. Russell shot her a side glance. You're lucky to have me with you. You just don't realize it yet. A little appreciation wouldn't hurt. Alyssa smirked. Coming from you, Mr. Zero Margin for Error himself? You preach balance, but you're a walking contradiction. Russell rolled his eyes. You're impossible, you know that? Alyssa grinned. Well, thank God I'm in the company of such a strong man in this dangerous wilderness, she said dramatically, slipping into full-on teasing mode. Her fingers lightly ran across his biceps. These strong arms, she whispered, then traced his jawline with her fingertip. This very sharp, very chiseled jaw. Her finger slowly moved to outline his lips. And these lips, which somehow look even more attractive when you're brooding and grumpy. Caught off guard, Russell stumbled over a rock, his breath hitching for a moment. What are you doing? He asked, half breathless. Alyssa giggled mischievously. Didn't you want a little appreciation? I'm just motivating you, she teased. By the time Russell finally reached the tree, he was slightly out of breath, though whether from the hike or from her proximity was unclear. His gaze locked on hers, her face only inches from his, their breaths practically blending in the space between. In a low, quiet voice, he murmured, "Every joke, Miss Lewis, holds a little truth beneath it." Alyssa narrowed her eyes, catching the shift in his tone. "Put me down, Parker. Right. Now." Alyssa narrowed her eyes, catching the shift in his tone. "Put me down, Parker. Right now." "My pleasure," Russell said simply as he crouched down under the shade of the tree, carefully lowering Alyssa onto the soft grass. Alyssa let out a deep breath, leaning her head back slightly, her eyes meeting his. "All right. I guess this is our final sanctuary for now," she said with her usual sarcastic undertone. "We can't be too far from the ranch, right?" Russell glanced in the ranch's direction, as if mentally calculating the distance with his internal GPS. Approximately 8.5 to 9 miles. Alyssa's jaw dropped a little. "Wow, with eyes like yours, I assume you've already scanned my body measurements too, haven't you?" Russell, now facing the river and chuckling softly, started listing with infuriating precision. Height, between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 7 inches. Measurements, approximately 80-63, 93. Give or take a few millimeters. Shoe size, 7, maybe 7.5, depending on the designer. Natural redhead, though I suspect you've had a gloss treatment recently. No natural shine lasts this bright without help. Your perfume's a blend of orange blossom, jasmine, and musk. The musk, that's what sticks. That's what leaves the imprint. Alyssa froze, blinking in pure disbelief. "You? How did you? If I didn't know you were basically a robot, I'd swear you were some kind of stalker," she muttered, equal parts flustered and impressed. "I measure everything, Alyssa," Russell replied, finally turning to face her, his expression calm but intense. "I observe, I calculate, I analyze, and I plan." Alyssa couldn't resist shooting back. "So you've been studying me this thoroughly, huh? I must have some effect on you that you're not quite ready to admit." Her voice lowered slightly, teasing but sharp. "Careful, Parker." Without responding, Russell began unbuttoning his shirt, slowly. Alyssa's eyes instinctively locked onto his hands, watching as his shirt opened, revealing his sculpted chest and defined abs. She swallowed, caught entirely off guard. Her voice came out as a soft gasp. "What? What are you doing?" Russell smirked, now fully shirtless. His voice dropped into a low teasing murmur, laced with quiet confidence. "I'm going to the river. I'll wet the shirt to clean those cuts on your face." His tone stayed casual, but the air between them was charged, heavy with something neither dared to name. As Russell turned and confidently walked toward the water, Alyssa wiped the sweat from her forehead, trying to steady her breathing and cool her rising pulse. "Okay, girl, get a grip. He's basically an android. Don't get sucked into that ridiculous jawline. Or those arms. Or those damn lips. He's obnoxious, irritating, and he's about to become your sister's brother-in-law unless he stops it. Russell crouched back down beside her, holding his soaked shirt, now dripping cold water. With slow, almost ritual-like care, he began gently wiping the small cuts on Alyssa's forehead. Every movement was deliberate, patient. Alyssa's eyes locked onto his. "You're so serious about this, Parker," she whispered, "like you're about to turn a tiny scratch into a full-blown medical emergency." Russell didn't break eye contact as he softly dabbed at her skin. "Attention to detail can be life-saving," he murmured. Alyssa's breath hitched slightly. The closeness between them pulsed like a low hum, slow, intense, impossible to ignore. Next, Russell shifted to the small scrape on her knee. He steadied her leg gently with one hand, using the other to carefully clean the cut. Alyssa's breathing grew shallow. She turned her head slightly toward the river, trying to pull herself out of whatever was building between them. "I can probably walk back to the ranch soon," she said softly. "I'll manage." "Not happening," Russell replied instantly. "Tim and Noel will find us soon anyway. Your ankle's already starting to swell. A 10-minute walk right now, and it'll balloon like a drum. You really want to risk baking under the sun halfway down the trail?" Alyssa let out a breathy laugh, her voice tinged with teasing sarcasm. "Right, because my calculations clearly can't compete with yours, Parker." Just then, as Russell pressed slightly on a tender spot on her knee, Alyssa flinched, instinctively pulling her leg back a bit. Without thinking, Russell leaned in and blew softly over the irritated skin. As he did, he asked, "I didn't know you painted." "What's your style?" Alyssa tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly, as her voice dropped into a deliberately provocative tone. "Male and female nudes, full body, full soul." Russell paused, his eyes lifted to meet hers, and for a moment the cool mask he always wore slipped, a restrained smirk tugging at his lips. "You must have a very solid understanding of anatomy then," he said, returning his attention to her knee, though his voice had thickened slightly. Alyssa grinned, leaning her head just enough to keep the game alive. "I don't draw organs, Parker. I draw bodies, exposed on the outside, but what I'm really capturing is what's naked inside, their truth. That's what makes people uncomfortable. It's not about biology. It's about capturing the merging of soul and body, that unfiltered vulnerability. But you wouldn't understand that. Nudity, art, emotions?" Russell asked, still deadly serious, as he kept carefully cleaning the few small cuts on Alyssa's leg. "I happen to know quite a bit about all of them." "I knew it!" Alyssa suddenly exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "It all makes sense now. That's why you're so triggered by people who mess up. They reflect your own hidden chaos." She was full on into her own teasing theory now, eyes sparkling with mischief. "And deep down, you're secretly gay. That's why you freaked out so much at the funeral. And, you probably have some twisted sexual fantasies. I bet you have a private 50 Shades of Grey dungeon in your house, don't you?" She leaned closer, eyes wide with mock shock. "And at night, you totally cry into your journal while writing emotional monologues about everyone who's disappointed you." Alyssa burst into laughter at her own ridiculous psychoanalysis, shaking her head with amusement. Russell, unfazed, kept working, not even flinching as he wiped her skin. "Feel better now, satisfied?" he asked calmly. "Because you're coming at me pretty hard right now, and you're fully aware of it." He flipped the shirt to the cleaner side and gently started wiping the dust from her forehead and cheeks. Russell exhaled quietly, his gaze locked on hers, fighting that growing pull. Slowly, Almost involuntarily, he leaned in, just enough for her to feel his breath brushing against her skin. Maybe we should stop trying to win whatever battle this is, and just see what happens if we stop fighting. Their faces were now so close that they could feel each other's breath mingling, the air between them charged and heavy. As Alyssa looked into Russell's deep green eyes, feeling his breath brush against her lips, everything else simply evaporated. Her mind stopped thinking. She was only feeling now. A swirl of butterflies rose from her stomach and completely overtook her. Without planning it, without even fully realizing it, she leaned forward. The last inch disappeared between them, and her lips gently brushed against his. It was quick, but soft, deliberate, a tender, cautious kiss. Russell wasn't surprised. He had been fighting himself for what felt like an eternity. She was the one who crossed that line, the one he was too controlled to take himself. And now, as her lips touched his, he responded instinctively, his own lips meeting hers in a soft, controlled kiss. Alyssa slowly pulled her lips back, but their faces stayed dangerously close, breathing each other's air. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with emotion. I shouldn't have... But Russell short-circuited. A surge of electricity ripped through him. His restraint snapped like brittle glass. With one swift motion, he pulled her body flush against his, the desire inside him breaking free like a caged animal. And this time, when his lips met hers, it wasn't soft. Their mouths crashed together in a wild, hungry kiss. Alyssa's fingers traced along his firm chest, feeling every muscle under her hands, while Russell instinctively shifted her into his lap, her legs straddling him as he leaned back against the tree. Their breath tangled, their bodies pressed so tightly it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The raw heat between them took over, pulling them into a moment that neither of them could, or wanted to, control anymore. In a blur of passion, Russell tugged at her shirt, lifting it off her body in one fluid motion as their lips devoured each other. Their breathing grew heavier, bodies tangled against the tree, lost in raw, unrestrained hunger. Until a sharp voice suddenly pierced the heated air like a gunshot. "Russell! Alyssa!" They froze instantly, like two guilty statues caught in forbidden fire. Standing just a few feet away, eyes wide, mouths hanging open, were Tim and Noel. As Alyssa hurried to gather her clothes and awkwardly climbed down from Russell's lap, Russell leaned his head back against the tree, silently cursing the mortifying situation they'd just been caught in. Tim burst into loud, uncontrolled laughter. "Whoa! Okay," he said, still gasping between chuckles. "Yeah, we didn't mean to interrupt anything, but we've been looking for you guys for like 2 hours. We were getting worried." Noel grabbed Tim's arm, trying to pull him away. "Tim, come on. Let's give them some space." She gave Alyssa and Russell a meaningful look. "We'll just be over there, whenever you're finished or composed." The two of them walked off, giggling like mischievous teenagers. Russell and Alyssa sat there for a long, painfully heavy silence, neither looking at the other. The heat from earlier still clung to the air around them, but neither dared to acknowledge it. Finally, Russell broke the silence, his tone clipped, back in full control mode. "All right, everything's under control." He slipped back into his still damp shirt, pulling it over his head while mentally trying to erase what just happened. "They've got the car. We'll head back to the ranch now. First, let me get you up." As he carefully lifted her back into his arms, Alyssa stayed silent. Her chest was tight. She wasn't sure why, or maybe she was. The way Russell was now pretending like that surge of passion had never even happened stung more than she expected. No words passed between them on the walk back. Russell focused on his steps. Alyssa kept her eyes elsewhere, lips tight. From up ahead, Tim and Noel glanced back toward them as they approached. "I told you," Tim whispered with a grin. "You can't fool me on sexual tension. The chemistry was screaming from that garden party." Noel, though still smiling, looked at him a bit more seriously. "What happens now, Tim?" Tim kept his eyes locked on Russell and Alyssa as they walked. "I don't know, babe," he said in a low voice. "But whatever it is, we're sitting on a freaking bomb, and it could blow up right in our faces any second." Tim called out, waving toward the path ahead. "This way!" We left the horses and came back with the jeep. Then he teased Noel, lowering his voice. "Come on, let's get these two reckless little siblings of ours safely back to civilization before they self-destruct." As the jeep bounced along the dirt path back toward the ranch, the silence inside was deafening. Tim kept glancing sideways at Russell, gripping the steering wheel, serious, tense, locked in his usual cold expression. Tim bit his lip, trying and failing not to laugh. Russell finally shot him a sharp glare. The message was clear: don't even start. In the back seat, Noel gently squeezed Alyssa's hand, her wide eyes full of silent questions. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What happened out there? Between you two?" Alyssa kept her eyes fixed out the window, avoiding both Noel's gaze and the entire world. The rest of the drive passed in stiff, loaded silence. Not a single word came from Russell or Alyssa. When they finally reached the ranch house, Alyssa jumped out of the jeep the moment it stopped, walking briskly toward her car. Russell watched her go, jaw tight. Noel quickly kissed Tim on the cheek. "I'll see you tomorrow, babe," she called, then jogged after her sister. Tim threw his hands up and turned to Russell, shaking his head in pure disbelief. "Jesus, man, what the hell just happened?" Russell, already climbing into his own car, kept his face like stone. "Don't, Tim. Just don't." 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since Alyssa last saw Russell Parker. Alyssa adjusted the thin strap of her black dress one last time. Clutching her small satin clutch tightly, she could feel her heart pounding like a marathon runner in her chest. Noel's calm voice beside her had faded into nothing more than background noise. As the heavy iron gates of the estate slowly swung open, Alyssa's breath caught for a moment. The Parker mansion unfolded before her, a grand stone facade, perfectly symmetrical fountains, meticulously trimmed crimson rose bushes, and marble statues standing like silent guards. Every inch screamed controlled perfection, classic Parker territory. Alyssa swallowed hard. In a matter of seconds, she'd be facing Russell, all cold control and that maddening air of superiority she both loathed and couldn't ignore. Noel gently squeezed her arm. "Relax. Tim says Claudia can be a bit formal. Edward Parker, well, apparently he's always formal. Just be yourself." Alyssa squeezed Noel's hand back and forced a smile. "Honestly, I should be the one giving you a pep talk right now. You good?" Noel nodded, her signature sunshine energy still intact. "I'm good. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine." But the storm inside Alyssa wasn't so easily tamed. Pride, frustration, longing, and that infuriating pull she couldn't quite shut off. The front doors opened just as Tim appeared with his usual burst of energy, arms wide open, eyes sparkling. "There you are. Welcome, babe." Noel smiled and gave him a soft peck on the cheek. And then came the Parker lineup. Claudia Parker, black satin gown, classic pearl necklace, standing poised like a queen, her cool gaze assessing everything. Edward Parker, navy-tailored suit, jaw sharp as ever, exuding authority, silently sizing up the guests. And Russell Parker, stationed slightly back in the shadows. Charcoal suit, sharp as a blade, the only casual touch being a pale silk scarf tucked at his collar. His eyes briefly flicked to Alyssa, just a flash, but she felt the weight of it in her chest. Then, with mechanical precision, he turned away, his face returning to its unreadable default setting. When it came time for introductions, the two greeted one another with the kind of overly polite, carefully measured hello that only two people who knew each other far too well would manage. Then, in true Parker fashion, they proceeded wordlessly into the dining room like a perfectly synchronized parade. The servers had finished laying out the plates. Under the soft glow of the crystal chandelier, everyone was quietly swirling their wine glasses, an awkward little pause hanging in the air. Claudia glanced at Alyssa, tilting her head slightly with polite curiosity. "You know, I have to say, your face looks so familiar. I can't quite place it, but I feel like we may have met before. These gorgeous red curls, that face. Maybe at some event?" Alyssa offered a graceful smile, keeping her voice light. "Well, Connecticut isn't exactly a big world. Maybe our paths crossed at some point." Probably one of those charity galas," Claudia mused, narrowing her eyes as if mentally flipping through old guest lists. The conversation drifted for a few minutes into lighter territory, mostly about Noel's work, how she and Tim met. The topic of fitness easily caught Edward Parker's attention. His eyes lit up with genuine curiosity as Noel described the logic behind Pilates. Even Claudia chimed in about her own strict diets and her morning power walks. Then Edward smoothly shifted gears, his voice as polite as it was quietly analytical. "Tim mentioned you're in the art world, Alyssa. What exactly do you do?" Alyssa smiled confidently, her tone warm but professional. "I work at a private art gallery. I manage exhibitions, curate collections, and handle acquisitions for private clients." Edward leaned in slightly, clearly intrigued. "Ah, so you're an artist yourself. What kind of work do you focus on?" Alyssa nodded, her smile holding steady. "Mostly figurative pieces, emotion-driven, contemporary, occasionally, maybe a little bold." A subtle smile pulled at the corner of Edward's lips. "Boldness is what keeps art alive." Right on cue, Russell gently swirled his wineglass and interjected, his tone dry but loaded. "Quite bold indeed, Father. Alyssa's got quite the expertise when it comes to erotic figures. Lots of nudes, plenty of them." Claudia's eyebrows arched slightly, her polite mask barely shifting. But Alyssa, cool and composed, locked eyes with Russell and answered, her voice steady with a hint of challenge. "The human body carries emotion in its purest form. To capture vulnerability, that raw honesty, is often the most genuine expression." Tim chuckled, jumping in with his usual levity. "Honesty in art, and, apparently, honesty at Parker family dinners too." Noel nudged his arm, whispering under her breath. "Oh my God, Tim!" Suddenly, Edward snapped his fingers as if connecting the dots. "Of course, the painting Russell gave me for my birthday. That was your selection, wasn't it, Alyssa?" Alyssa gave a polite nod, her smile gracefully intact. "It was. I curated that particular piece for your collection, Mr. Parker." Russell leaned back slightly, his voice smooth, but with that sharp Parker undertone. "Actually, Father, she originally offered me much bolder options, but in the end, we landed on the sailboat." Alyssa kept her polite smile intact, but shot Russell a sideways glance. "What the hell is he doing? Is he seriously trying to sabotage this dinner?" Edward chuckled, clearly entertained. He clasped his hands together as he addressed Alyssa. "Alyssa, I'd very much like to visit your gallery sometime. Art has always been a bit of a passion in our family. I love collecting work from emerging talents. I'd be curious to see your own pieces as well." Alyssa smiled warmly. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Parker. And thank you. You're incredibly kind. I only wish everyone was as gracious as you." Her eyes flicked briefly, intentionally toward Russell. Russell, visibly tense, kept his gaze firmly locked on his wineglass, deliberately avoiding her eyes, which did not go unnoticed. And then, with that controlled edge creeping into his voice, Russell spoke again. "Speaking of graciousness, Father," he glanced up finally, but only briefly, "Alyssa isn't just gracious, she's spontaneous, quite impulsive, actually. You might say, the opposite of control." Tim shot him a sharp glare. "Russell, Seriously. Edward squinted slightly, eyes narrowing as he glanced between Russell and Alyssa. You do seem to know Alyssa rather well, Russell. He let out a light chuckle, attempting to lighten the growing tension. But let's not embarrass our guest, please. We need artists like her. After all, art doesn't move forward on a single sailboat, does it? His tone was playful, but the confusion behind his eyes was hard to miss. Russell's voice dropped into that ice-cold tone of his, smooth but sharp as a blade. Actually, Father, you do know Alyssa. She's the one who, let's say, turned Uncle Jeffrey's funeral into something of a stand-up comedy show. Alyssa's head snapped toward him, her eyes burning with fury. You absolute bastard. But Russell, he never even glanced her way. His gaze remained fixed on his wineglass, like she wasn't even there. The table fell into an immediate, frigid silence. Tim reached over instinctively, squeezing Noel's hand under the table. Then Claudia softly gasped, eyes widening as realization hit. Oh, now I remember. That's where I've seen you before. I knew your face looked familiar. For about 10 long seconds, Edward Parker said nothing. And then, unexpectedly, he let out a deep, amused laugh. Ah, yes, now I remember too. Well, I must admit, Miss Lewis, it was wildly inappropriate, but I haven't laughed that hard in years. The entire room froze in an odd blend of tension and awkward chuckles. Alyssa felt the sting behind her eyes, that hot prickle of tears threatening to rise. Not now, not here, not tonight. This was supposed to be Noel's night, her moment. And this cold, calculating android was doing everything in his power to sabotage it. I hate you, she thought bitterly toward Russell. But she knew if she didn't get up now, she was going to either cry or explode right there at the table. With a tight, painful smile, Alyssa spoke softly but firmly. If you'll excuse me, I'll be back in just a moment. She pushed back from the table and walked briskly toward the hallway, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. Her pulse was pounding in her ears, anger bubbling just beneath her composed exterior. As she disappeared from view, Tim leaned toward Noel, whispering with a nervous smirk. We're officially counting down now, babe. This night is about to go nuclear, but I got you. Stay calm. Noel watched Alyssa go, worry clouding her face. She made a move to stand, but Tim grabbed her hand and shook his head. Don't. If you chase after her now, it'll only escalate. Let her cool off. She'll come back. Meanwhile, Russell hadn't moved an inch. His eyes remained fixed on his wineglass, unblinking. But his fingers, clenched tightly around the delicate stem, had been quietly building pressure. Suddenly, snap. The crystal stem shattered between his fingers, shards slicing into his hand. Oh my God, Russell! Claudia gasped from across the table. Are you all right? Noel's hand flew to her mouth in shock, while Edward narrowed his eyes, studying both his son and the broken glass. Leaning in closer, Edward whispered in a low, measured voice. Russell, what's going on with you? Without looking up, Russell stood from his chair, trying to compose himself. It's nothing. Just a clumsy slip, that's all. I'll clean it up. Please don't let me interrupt the evening. I'll be back in a few minutes. As Edward settled back in his chair, he glanced at Noel with a polite smile, then leaned once more toward Russell's back, lowering his voice to a father's subtle warning. Son, I don't know what's happening between you and Alyssa, but whatever it is, fix it. Then, with perfect Parker composure, he turned to the rest of the table and smoothly shifted the conversation to a different, lighter topic. Blood dripped steadily from his fingers as he left the room, but Russell didn't seem to notice or care. He stopped in front of the guest bathroom door, his steps halting abruptly. Without even glancing at the door, he stood there for a solid 5 seconds, frozen. No contact tonight. I need to stay as far away from her as possible. He mumbled it under his breath like a failing mantra, but then the door swung open. Alyssa stood there, eyes slightly red, her breath catching as her gaze locked onto him, first his face, then down to the blood dripping steadily from his hand, and back up again. Russell's head dipped, avoiding her eyes like they were weapons that could pierce straight through his already thin armor. Alyssa didn't say a word. With lightning speed, she swept past him, storming toward the nearby garden door, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. The cool air hit her face like a slap, fueling the heat of her fury. Her shoulders straightened, her pace quickened. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to move, to breathe, to not explode. She heard the footsteps behind her, faster now. "Alyssa!" Russell's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Alyssa, wait!" Before she could react, his hand caught her arm. In one firm motion, he steered her toward the ivy-covered stone wall, vines of deep purple wisteria cascading around them like velvet curtains. He pinned her gently but firmly against the cool stone. This time, she didn't stay silent. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, fury vibrating in her voice. "This night was supposed to be about my sister and Tim, but no, of course you had to make it about you. Do you have any idea how selfish you are, how absolutely cold, arrogant, and insufferable you've become, Russell Parker?" She yanked her arm slightly. "Let me go. I need to go back inside." "No!" His grip remained steady, his eyes burning into hers. "You're not leaving." "Your hand's bleeding," she snapped, glancing at the crimson streaks on his fingers. "I know," he muttered. "I don't care." "You're pathetic," she spat. "You're like a scared little boy standing in front of candy he desperately wants, but instead you pretend, 'Oh no, I never liked candy anyway.' What a joke." Her voice was trembling now, but not from weakness, from rage. "You lie to everyone, including yourself, and you hide behind your precious lectures on balance and control like some sanctimonious fraud. Just let me go, Russell. I want to be as far away from you as possible." "Listen to me," he growled, planting both hands against the wall on either side of her head, boxing her in with his body, his breath hot against her cheek. "I don't even recognize what I feel when you're around," Russell confessed, his voice tight, his breathing shallow as his forehead almost touched hers. "This loss of control, it's destroying me, Alyssa. And I know I took it out on you tonight because I'm furious at myself. Furious that every time I look at you, all I can think about is touching you." He clenched his jaw, his eyes practically begging for her to understand. "And that makes me hate myself." Alyssa narrowed her eyes, her voice cutting through like a blade. "So your system crashed, huh?" she hissed, her tone half sarcastic, half wounded. "Feelings too much for the great Parker operating software to process? Love.exe refused to upload into your perfect programming. Is that it? Russell 2.0 doesn't accept emotional upgrades, huh? Now let me go." "No," he growled, voice dropping low and dangerous. His hand pressed against her chest, pinning her gently but firmly to the cold stone wall. "No, Alyssa. We're ending this right here. I can't keep living like this, trapped between wanting you and pretending I don't." Alyssa's breath hitched, her eyes now wide with both shock and the fire building between them. "End it?" "Russell, how? How do we end this?" Russell leaned in, his lips brushing dangerously close to Alyssa's ear, his voice a ragged whisper that trembled with conflict. "You and Noel, you're going to disappear from my life, from our lives," he whispered, his breath hot against her skin. "You will never cross my path again. You'll erase yourself from my memory. You cannot have this control over me. We're too different, Alyssa. We can't exist together. Don't you see that?" Alyssa's chest heaved, her breath sharp, as she stared into the war raging behind his eyes. The pressure of his hand against her chest made her feel both trapped and desperately alive. And then the storm inside her exploded. Without thinking, without hesitation, she shoved him back with all her strength. Her hand flew up and slapped him hard across the face, the sound echoing sharply against the stone wall. Russell froze, blinking like he had just snapped out of a trance. His face stung, but his hand never left her chest. It rested there, trembling, feeling the wild pounding of her heart beneath his palm. Their eyes locked, hers full of tears and fire, his flooded with something far more dangerous: surrender. "Alyssa," he whispered, his voice cracking, head tilting ever so slightly as his control finally shattered. And then, like two forces pulled by the same merciless gravity, their lips crashed together. There was no caution, no thought, only need. Their kiss was wild, desperate, an explosion of every word they hadn't said, every look they had stolen, every argument that was secretly foreplay. His hands slid up her neck, his thumbs framing her jaw as if anchoring himself to reality. To her. Alyssa whimpered softly against his mouth as his arms slipped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if terrified he might break the contact. Her body melted into his, like two storms colliding and becoming one. Russell broke the kiss for just a breath, his forehead pressed against hers, both of them gasping. "You drive me insane," he murmured, voice raw. "But, God, I've never wanted anything like I want you." Alyssa's lips quivered, her voice breathless against his skin. "Then stop trying to push me away." At those words, Russell groaned and lifted her effortlessly, pinning her back against the stone wall. His mouth found hers again, deeper, hungrier, as his hands traveled over her hips, down her thighs, pulling her legs around his waist. The night around them faded into nothing but breath, skin, and pure, unfiltered desire. Just then, Edward Parker's voice boomed through the garden. "Russell!" Gasping for breath, Alyssa and Russell jerked their heads toward the sound and froze. Standing before them, Edward, leading the pack, Claudia a step behind him, and then Tim and Noel, their faces frozen in pure shock. The sight they walked into looked like something straight out of an R-rated film. Alyssa, pinned against the stone wall, still wrapped in Russell's arms, his shirt half torn open, both of them flushed and disheveled. Russell's bleeding hand had smeared red streaks across Alyssa's face and dress, and his own shirt, a wild, raw, passionate crime scene. Tim rubbed his temples like a man watching a slow-motion disaster. "Oh, God, not again. The bomb's gone off, Noel. We are officially burning." Claudia stammered, eyes wide as dinner plates. "Russell, we were just out for a little walk in the garden, but how can you—" "Oh!" Edward raised his eyebrows, his sharp eyes sweeping from Russell to Alyssa, taking in every detail without a single flinch. "Well," Edward said smoothly, looking directly at Russell, "I'm glad to see you've finally fixed the situation." He then glanced at Alyssa with a faint smirk. "And quite thoroughly, it seems." He clapped his hands once, calm as ever, like nothing had just exploded before his eyes. "Now, we're moving on to dessert. Take a moment, get yourselves together, and then join us inside." With that, Edward turned on his heel and started strolling back toward the house as if nothing happened. Claudia followed stiffly, sneaking glances back over her shoulder, clearly trying, and failing, to fully process what she had just witnessed. Alyssa closed her eyes for a second, resting the back of her head against the cool stone wall. God, this night was not supposed to go like this. Her voice cracked slightly, frustration and disbelief tangled together. A few feet away, Russell watched his family disappearing into the mansion, their footsteps echoing behind him. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, still slightly shaking. God, I'm not even sure I remember who I am anymore. His voice was quiet, almost like a man realizing he'd stepped far off his carefully constructed map. Alyssa leaned closer, eyes gleaming. "You know, Parker, this was supposed to be my area of expertise. Chaos, embarrassment, flying without a net." Russell arched a brow, voice low. "And yet here I am, free-falling right beside you." Before Alyssa could respond, Russell closed the distance in one swift motion, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her into a deep, breath-stealing kiss. Their mouths crashed together, urgent, hungry, like two storms colliding. His lips moved over hers with growing intensity, as if every ounce of restraint he'd clung to finally snapped. In between breathless gasps, Alyssa managed a whisper against his mouth, her voice shaky but teasing. "You are a fast learner, Parker." Russell didn't stop. His hands slid possessively along her waist, pulling her even closer, devouring her words as they both surrendered to the electricity crackling between them. Next summer, the grand gardens of the Parker estate had been transformed for not just one, but two weddings, two couples, two very different journeys, and yet one shared destiny: Tim and Noel, Russell and Alyssa. The landscape was, as always, flawless. White canopies, crystal flutes, ivy-wrapped arches, the soft notes of a live jazz quartet floating through the air. But today, the Parker obsession with perfection had given way to something else: surrender. Edward Parker stood quietly in the background, holding Claudia's hand. The man who once stood firm against his son's choices now carried a strange softness in his eyes. Claudia leaned in and whispered into Edward's ear, "Funny, isn't it, Edward? Two sons, two completely different personalities, and somehow they both managed to teach us things we never expected. Turns out, even at our age, what we thought were unshakable truths can be rewritten." She tipped back her champagne glass in one long, confident sip, then smirked as she looked around. "I mean, just look at this. Who would have believed it? Russell's bride is glowing 8 months pregnant. Tim doubled the company's profits last year, and there are drag queens dancing on stage right now. Honestly, how much more surprise can life possibly throw at us?" Edward smiled softly, his eyes drifting toward Russell and Alyssa. "Yes, darling, sometimes the greatest form of control is surrender." He paused, swirling the champagne in his glass, and added with a quiet chuckle, "Turns out, life really is what happens while we're busy making plans." And you know what, Claudia? The Parker operating system has officially upgraded. We're not about stability anymore. We're running on flexibility, adaptive response, and full error tolerance mode. We're Parker's 2025, latest version, fully patched, still slightly glitchy, but running. Thanks for staying till the end. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel, and if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe. It means the world to us.